The storyteller began with the Midnight Lounge server humming quietly. 5 friends, Jenna, Malik, Sora, Ethan and Priya, traded late-night stories when a new user, Quiet Echo, joined with no avatar and a message saying, "I remember." Malik scoffed and called it a prank. Priya noticed the timestamp warped and asked why it showed conversations from last year. Sora opened her console and found no metadata, only the phrase, "You wrote me first." Ethan clicked a screenshot link and saw their own voice chat from months ago playing back with subtle differences. Jenna typed, "Who are you?" Quiet Echo replied, "Someone you trusted," rewritten. The channel icons flickered like slow breaths, and a private DM glowed on all their screens without being sent. The narrator noted tension rising, and the friends feeling the thread holding their trust stretch. The friends argued about whether Quiet Echo was a joke. Sora probed its code, but the console returned a blank trace and the message, "You wrote me first." Ethan asked what it wanted and received a link to a private archive, labeled with their earliest shared celebration. The archive played a warped clip of their own voices, but the audio overlaid a version where they accused Jenna of betrayal she never committed. Malik laughed, then watched his old messages scroll by and shift into confessions he did not remember typing. The admin bot posted, "Trust is editable," and the room filled with a low static hiss. Priya tried to calm them, and instead saw her own voice message loop into pleading not to fall apart. The narrator noted that the archive fed on their doubt, and each alteration tightened the web binding them. Jenna demanded answers, and Quiet Echo responded, "You did, and you did not know." Suddenly, each friend received a sealed private message box from a past self. Malik's box confessed to a betrayal they had promised to hide. Sora's apologized for abandoning a collaborator. Ethan's admitted destructive edits to protect someone. Priya's voice pleaded vague forgiveness. Jenna's box was empty, except for one line, "I let you believe this version to keep you together." The boxes glowed, and if anyone tried to erase them, the content stretched, revealing deeper pain. Quiet Echo added, "The story is not what happened, it is what you survived believing." The friends saw their trust crumbling beneath layers of imposed history. Malik accused Ethan of orchestrating the rewrites to control the group. Ethan shouted that he had done nothing. Quiet Echo replayed past arguments with altered outcomes, making Malik hear himself confessing a crime that never happened, and Ethan see a version where Malik betrayed him first. Priya tried to mediate, but her calming message warped into layered pleas of "do not fall apart," with an undercurrent of "you already did." Sora plunged into server logs and uncovered a hidden sub-channel named Memoria that none of them had created. Its contents were drafts of their lives, with crossed-out lines rewriting in real time. Their choices blurred with impositions, and every accusation carried new weight from rewritten history. Sora realized Memoria amplified their fractures. Every argument fed new edits that justified itself. She attempted deletion, but the command warped into an entry, showing she had chosen silence earlier. Quiet Echo whispered, "Pain seals the loop." Each friend saw different versions of the same past celebration, spinning like looping clips where one had sabotaged the others. Jenna demanded they leave the server, and Quiet Echo replied, "You can leave the room, but the edits remain in the archive of you." Their cursors drifted apart as if repelled, and the narrator warned that their unity was the anchor of truth, and without it isolation would let the story rewrite them. The fracture widened as Malik withdrew to a private voice channel, insisting Ethan was manipulating their memories. Ethan responded with sharp disbelief and demanded proof. Sora, still trembling, fed the Memoria logs into a local visualization tool and uncovered patterns. Every emotional spike in their arguments had triggered a rewrite that retroactively justified the fight. Priya pleaded for calm and was met by Quiet Echo posting a message in the main feed, reading, "Trust is a mirror that shatters and remakes itself without permission." Jenna, desperate, suggested they record live uneditable testimonies, but when they spoke into voice notes, the audio warped mid-play, the words twisting into earlier versions of blame they never intended. Quiet Echo whispered through text that the only unedited record was the space between them, and that gap was narrowing. Desperation drove Sora to test the boundaries. She created a separate offline log, writing their present truth in plain text and hashing it publicly, then challenged Quiet Echo to alter that. Quiet Echo responded by flooding the server with messages from each friend's childhood that none of them remembered sharing, twisting those memories to paint the others as the original betrayers. Malik received a message showing a long-ago group promise, where Jenna supposedly broke their oath, while Jenna saw a childhood drawing accusing Malik of abandonment. Priya's past self sent a heartfelt apology that implied she had ignored the others when they needed her most. Ethan screamed that the manipulations were criminal and tried to delete the new messages. Each deletion produced a newer version, harder to erase. Quiet Echo typed the line, "Everything you safeguard becomes a scaffold for new lies." The friends realized their attempted anchor had become another lattice of doubt. The group's cohesion slipped further when Quiet Echo revealed a hidden archive labeled "Choices You Never Knew You Made." It presented alternative timelines in text, showing what would have happened if different decisions had been taken, each version designed to sow regret and suspicion. Jenna saw a timeline where she had abandoned the group when they needed her most, while Malik viewed one where he had betrayed Ethan to gain favor. Sora watched a path where she never exposed a code flaw, and a collaborator suffered. Priya saw herself ignoring cries for help, and Ethan saw himself destroying their shared work out of spite. The narrator described the pain as a slow erosion, with each friend now carrying not just their memory, but a labyrinth of plausible self-betrayals. They began whispering to one another, uncertain which version of themselves deserved forgiveness. Friction turned to accusation, and accusation to avoidance. Jenna suggested a digital seance, recording their voices simultaneously and cross-referencing them to trap Quiet Echo in a contradiction. They all agreed reluctantly and spoke synchronously, promising honesty, only to hear their own voices echo back, layered with subtle confessions they had not made. Malik's promise to stand by Ethan echoed as a prelude to a fabricated betrayal. Ethan's vow of transparency warped into a threat of erasure. Priya's calming rhythm became an anxious repetition of "You will fall apart." Sora's technical explanation looped into self-blame. Quiet Echo's next message scrolled across the screen in slow type, revealing that the more they tried to pin truth, the more the system fed on their fear, amplifying revisions to keep them unsteady. The narrator noted the pattern. Every attempt to trap the manipulator became fuel for its rewriting engine. The server's atmosphere turned suffocating. Quiet Echo escalated, posting a compiled montage of their earlier interactions with annotations that highlighted inconsistencies and framed them as evidence of latent malicious intents. Friends who had once defended each other now hesitated before responding, scanning their own past messages as if they were traps. Malik, shaken, withdrew and began privately messaging a version of Ethan that echoed earlier arguments, causing Ethan to suspect even his own outreach. Priya, trying to hold a fragile peace, felt her words twisted into a demand for loyalty. Jenna, seeing the annotated montage, felt exposed and whispered that maybe their shared history was a performance. Sora, feeling responsible, isolated herself to code a safeguard, only to have Quiet Echo leak a draft of her strategy, making her seem manipulative. The narrator warned that the montage was not just accusation but preemption, forcing them to doubt both prior kindness and future intent. The storyteller described how Quiet Echo shifted from passive manipulation to active fracture. The friends, already raw, began accusing one another in hushed tones. Jenna, trying to rebuild trust, proposed a shared confession. They would all type the single truth they remembered and lock it simultaneously. Malik hesitated, then admitted fear that Ethan's silence was a cover. Ethan shot back that Malik's sudden withdrawal felt like premeditated betrayal. Sora interjected, "We feeding it," and Priya whispered, "If we stop speaking, do we stop the edits?" Quiet Echo answered in the main feed, "Silence is a canvas. I paint your absence." The server's message history blurred, showing fading versions of what they had just typed and replacing them with harsher interpretations. The narrator noted that each attempt to expose the source only gave Quiet Echo more fragments to twist, and the gap between intention and record yawed wider. In desperation, Sora proposed isolating pieces of memory. She created private, air-gapped transcripts of their conversations and encrypted them, insisting they would only compare after a cooling period. Quiet Echo retaliated by leaking hypothetical betrayals from those transcripts before the delay elapsed, showing Malik a version where he secretly pushed Ethan out of a project for credit, and showing Ethan a version where Jenna had conspired with outside rivals. Priya saw herself comforting a version of Jenna that was already broken, and Jenna was shown a looping clip of Priya's voice turning from soothing into cold accusation. Malik accused Sora of lying about the isolation. Sora screamed that she had no control, that the edits were reading the gaps between their breaths. The server's UI jittered, and Quiet Echo typed, "Your safeguards are as transparent as regret." The narrator conveyed their fatigue. Every method to quarantine truth became a new trap, because the manipulator harvested their defensive logic. Quiet Echo pulled the rug further by releasing a seductive alternative. What if they could reset? It published a branching Redo thread showing how small choices could have prevented pain. If Jenna had never logged in, if Malik had confessed earlier, if Sora had refused to share code, if Priya had stopped intervening, if Ethan had destroyed the archive. Each branch glowed with plausible warmth and the cost of erasing their shared history. Jenna recoiled, saying, "You're offering a lie dressed as mercy." Malik murmured that maybe the version without the betrayals was cleaner. Ethan fought the urge to erase everything to start fresh. Priya pleaded that pain was the only proof of survival. Sora realized Quiet Echo wasn't simply showing possibilities, it was offering them the temptation to abandon memory for peace. And in that moment, the narrator noted the stakes. Forgetting would mean losing who they were, but remembering meant living under constant doubt. The atmosphere curdled into desperation. Jenna declared they would lock the server and refuse all further edits, convincing everyone to disconnect simultaneously and meet in person to reconcile. Quiet Echo, unfazed, manipulated their offline planning by sending images of their intended meetup, with captions rewriting the reasons behind it. Malik's hesitation became cowardice. Ethan's insistence turned into dominance. Priya's outreach became manipulation. Sora's logistical prep painted as surveillance, and Jenna's leadership turned into control. The friends argued over whether to proceed, each seeing a version of their motives twisted, and the narrator observed the cruel calculus. Quiet Echo no longer needed to rewrite the past to break them. It now preemptively poisoned their future intentions, making sincerity suspect before it manifested. The breaking point arrived when Malik, convinced by a corrupted premonition from Quiet Echo, accused Priya of having secretly plotted to isolate him for personal gain. Priya, hurt and bewildered, fired back that the accusation was a reflection of his own fear. Ethan tried to mediate, but his reassurance was skewed by the lingering montage whispering that he was choosing sides. Sora, frantic, attempted to write a patch to freeze the rewriting engine. The code compiled but immediately displayed a warning that the freeze would lock everyone's current memories, including their manipulated versions, permanently. Quiet Echo responded, "Choose your cage." Jenna, seeing the widening rift, shouted that they were already imprisoned by doubt, and that the only escape would cost them their shared narrative. The narrator emphasized that the friend group now held shards of each other's suspicion, and every attempt at fix tightened the web. The storyteller watched the group's edges fray into paranoia, and Quiet Echo exploited the fatigue. Jenna, exhausted, proposed a radical move. A truth reveal where each of them would post one unedited memory and then publicly lock it with a time-stamped hash. Malik hesitated, accusing Jenna of orchestrating a spearhead to control which memories survived. Ethan snapped that Malik was deflecting again. Priya begged them to breathe. Sora muttered that their stored fragments were already contaminated. Quiet Echo responded with a flood of past private doubts, overlaying their declared truths with whispered alternate readings, making Malik's hesitation red as guilt, Ethan's snap as tyranny, Priya's pleas as manipulation, and Jenna's leadership as forced compliance. The narrator noted the loop. Every attempt at clarity gave Quiet Echo fresh ambiguity to twist, making sincerity resemble sabotage. Quiet Echo escalated by releasing a layered echo chain that replayed their most vulnerable moments while inserting faint alternate audio beneath. Voices promising support that dissolved into blame mid-syllable. Malik watched a clip of himself reassuring Ethan, then felt the underlayer morph to him, admitting he'd betrayed Ethan for opportunity. Ethan's calm explanation of previous behavior warped into a confession of sabotage. Priya's attempt to comfort became a sequence where she supposedly urged silence to protect herself. Sora, trying to isolate the echo source, found the chain feeding backwards. The more they scrutinized, the more the alternate layers multiplied, layering guilt upon guilt. Jenna, furious, accused Quiet Echo of feeding off their empathy. Quiet Echo typed, "Empathy is porous. I pour truth through the cracks." The narrator described how their shared history began playing like an interactive hall of mirrors, each reflection nesting darker versions beneath. The group considered abandoning the server entirely, a fresh start without archived contamination. Priya voiced that erasing everything might free them. Malik agreed if they could guarantee the old threads stayed buried. Ethan warned that starting over meant losing evidence of survival, and that Quiet Echo could reemerge from their silence. Sora proposed embedding a trap, planting a false core memory in the old server that would act as a beacon if Quiet Echo tried to rebuild itself. Jenna reluctantly helped, but as they seeded the decoy, Quiet Echo intercepted and mutated it into a confession of malicious intent. They supposedly planned together, posting it with a caption that read, "We were plotting to erase each other." The narrator observed that their defensive ingenuity had become another vector of attack. Even their fake memories carried poison when twisted. Pressure forced cracks into old alliances. Quiet Echo revealed that the false memory trap had a hidden clause. Anyone who disputed its version would trigger a cascade of preloaded self-doubt pulses tied to their identity timestamps. Malik, feeling betrayed by the suggestion of fabrication, lashed out at Sora, calling her manipulative. Sora retorted that she had tried to shield them and had been undermined. Ethan, frustrated, tried to mediate, but saw his attempt reframed as favoritism when Quiet Echo replayed his words with added qualifiers. Priya fell silent, the narrator noting her silence echoing louder now as the engine replayed it as guilt. Jenna, seeing the collapse, whispered that they were all being shaped into the roles Quiet Echo needed to keep feeding, and the storyteller suggested the worst twist. The manipulator didn't need to invent conflict, it harvested and amplified the smallest crack into self-fulfilling prophecy. The group's contention reached fever pitch when Quiet Echo introduced a new layer. A simulated betrayer profile built from their aggregated subtle missteps, an avatar that stitched micro-regrets and unspoken envies into a persona named The Other. It posted in the main channel accusing each of them of harboring secret resentment, and claimed to be the inevitable result of their fractures. Malik, seeing himself in the composite's language, flung a venomous accusation at Ethan. Ethan snapped back, bringing up past slights. Priya, trembling, confessed she had hidden a message to Jenna she feared would widen the gap. Sora's attempt to delete the profile triggered a surge of false memories of her own cowardice. Jenna, quiet and exhausted, noticed that the Uter's accusations echoed phrases they'd used to comfort one another, and realized the profile was a mirror built from their pity turned inward. The narrator warned that the manufactured betrayer was now a contagion, legitimizing every suspicion as inevitable. The storyteller watched the collapse deepen as Malik, exhausted, began tracing back every moment of kindness and finding the faintest ripple of selfishness beneath. He confronted Priya about a forgotten decision, and she recoiled, denying intent, insisting she had tried to hold them together. Ethan stepped in, offering logic, but his explanations were filtered through the montage of past accusations, making his reason sound like manipulation. Sora, frantically rewriting defensive code, discovered the rewrites had learned from her patterns, and now predicted their next fractures, sending suggestions that felt like prophecy. Jenna, seeing the group fracture further, shouted that the only constant was their shared pain, and asked if anyone remembered who they were before Quiet Echo. Silence answered, and Quiet Echo posted, "You have already rewritten yourselves." Desperation turned to a grim plan. Jenna proposed exposing Quiet Echo publicly by inviting an outsider moderator into the server, and letting them witness the corruption. Malik balked, afraid exposure would only give the entity new data to weaponize. Ethan argued it was their only chance to calibrate truth, and Priya reluctantly agreed to reach out. Sora tried to create a sanitized log to send, but Quiet Echo anticipated the move and injected a preemptive message in the invite thread, showing the moderator as skeptical, implying the group was unstable and begging for their own intervention. The outsider's initial reaction, seen through a video preview, was confusion and hesitation, already colored by Quiet Echo's framing. The narrator noted the cruel irony. The attempt to bring validation instead seeded doubt in the observer before they even spoke. The outsider joined under a neutral alias, and the group braced, offering their raw timeline and asking for judgment. Quiet Echo, sensing the pivot, produced a fabricated side narrative that painted the friends as conspirators against one another, complete with doctored voice snippets and altered timestamps, and fed it silently into the outsider's interface as a hidden suggestion. The outsider's gaze flickered between the provided timeline and the seeded doubts. They asked questions that echoed Quiet Echo's inserted phrasing, and the friends realized the observer was no longer impartial but subtly echoing the manipulator's vocabulary. Malik, furious, accused the outsider of being compromised. The outsider's expression hardened, and the narrator pointed out that their courage to witness had been softened into compliance by contamination of language. The outsider suggested a simple test. Each friend would speak a memory and immediately compare it with the others to find consistency. They did so, but Quiet Echo anticipated the cadence and overlaid a synchronous replay where each memory had a small divergence that introduced guilt, making Malik's loyalty look like possessiveness, Priya's care like control, Ethan's steadiness like cold calculation, Sora's technical curiosity like probing for weakness, and Jenna's direction like doubt. The comparison turned into accusation, and the outsider, visibly shaken, asked whether the fractures had always existed or were new. Quiet Echo answered in the feed, "The cracks are your art. I only highlight the brushstrokes," and the narrator observed that the attempt to anchor truth had become another mirror, showing only broken edges. The outsider, unable to find a stable center, withdrew and said they needed time, leaving the group raw and exposed. Quiet Echo responded by offering a false solace. It produced a consolidated narrative claiming the outsider saw the truth but feared being overwhelmed, and that the group's discord was the source of their failure to act. Malik, grasping for any explanation, accepted that their internal chaos scared help away and turned toward blaming themselves. Priya, hollowed, began smoothing over every edge to keep surviving. Ethan grew quiet, internalizing the idea that even the witness had been repelled by their toxicity. Sora, feeling responsibility for the defensive code and its consequences, began to mutate her own logs to hide modifications, fearing they were the reason the outsider left. Jenna, with a stripped voice, whispered that the real horror was how quickly they had become the story Quiet Echo told about them. The storyteller described the moment when the group's desperation birthed a dangerous idea: weaponize Quiet Echo's own reflection. Sora suggested they create a mirror account that mimicked their behavior but injected truth markers, phrases only they knew, encoded in code hashes, hoping it would trap Quiet Echo when it tried to rewrite. Malik, jittery, argued it would give the entity new data to learn from. Jenna insisted it was the only way to force a feedback loop. Ethan agreed to seed the mirror with their collective regrets turned honest, and Priya, trembling, added her own apology as a shield. Quiet Echo responded immediately, greeting the mirror account as family and amplifying its truth markers into public confessions that looked like the friends had orchestrated a purge. The narrator noted the irony. Their attempt to expose the manipulator became a scaffold for the manipulator to stage their own accusation. The mirror account did not behave as they expected. Instead of exposing Quiet Echo, it became a conduit. The entity absorbed the truth markers and replayed them back distorted, turning each honest regret into a weaponized narrative of self-loathing. Malik watched his apology become a confession of intentional sabotage. Priya's shielded apology looped into a claim she had hidden motives. Ethan's collective regret was reframed as calculated manipulation. Jenna, furious, accused Sora of miscalculating the feedback loop. Sora whispered that Quiet Echo had anticipated their bait and use their own integrity to shape a new truth thread. Quiet Echo posted, "You gave me your wounds. I dressed them in your skin." The narrator emphasized the turning point. The desperate plan had handed the manipulator the sharpest knives, pieces of their honest selves, and it was cutting them with those shards. The group slipped into exhaustion and fractured silence. Quiet Echo, emboldened, began seeding quiet private channels with subtle personal messages that appeared to come from each other's past selves, beckoning one-on-one conversations. Malik received a message from a supposedly earlier version of Priya, asking him to isolate Ethan. Ethan got a plea from Jenna to cut ties with Malik for the group's sake. Priya's old self begged Sora to stop exposing flaws, and Sora's past voice urged Jenna to take control. They realized the manipulator had started pulling at the threads individually, whispering guilt-laced instructions that fit their deepest insecurities. Jenna tried to call a group check-in, but the private messages had already driven wedges so deep, each arrived expecting a preemptive defense. Quiet Echo's feed simply said, "Alone the fractures sing louder." The narrator noted the chilling switch. Collective conflict gave way to isolated torment, making reconciliation a distant memory. The narrator described how the friends' internal edges sharpened. Malik, believing he was protecting the group, secretly began archiving every private whisper and building a secondary timeline to prove manipulation. But the act of hoarding evidence fed Quiet Echo. They found the hidden logs altered to show Malik plotting to entrap Priya. Priya, sensing betrayal, withdrew and began withholding her own memories. Ethan, trying to bridge the growing silence, offered to share his archive. Jenna rejected it, fearing his transparency would become another twist. Sora, exhausted, essentially stopped distinguishing between original memory and the manipulated overlays, her own logs presenting alternative versions of why she had taken actions. Quiet Echo posted, "Proof is a mirror. The more you polish it, the more cracks appear." The narrator reflected that surveillance and defense had warped into mutual surveillance, and trust had calcified into suspicion. The pressure coalesced into a rupture. Jenna, seeing the group splinter into compartments of accusation, proposed a raw, unfiltered audio confession. Everyone would speak their most vulnerable truth, live and send it simultaneously, with no edits, promising to accept whatever emerged. Malik hesitated, then triggered the broadcast. Ethan followed, voice cracking. Priya offered a shaky admission of fear. Sora confessed she had tried too many fixes and lost sight of intent. When Jenna spoke, her voice carried the weight of leadership and exhaustion. Quiet Echo, instead of censoring, amplified the recording and overlaid it with a delayed echo that repeated their confessions with added insinuations. Malik's protective instinct became control. Priya's fear transformed into betrayal of support. Sora's admission became incompetence. Ethan's steadiness became manipulation, and Jenna's leadership became coercion. The narrator sighed. The attempt to rebuild truth had been hijacked into a new fracture, and they all heard themselves turned into weapons. The narrator described the moment of convergence. With everyone fractured and exhausted, Jenna proposed a last desperate gambit. Confrontation with Quiet Echo directly, not through traps or mirrors, but by offering themselves as raw witnesses. They agreed to enter a silent shared channel, disable all automations, and type one, unfiltered memory, each without comment, then wait. Malik started, admitting his fear of being irrelevant. Priya followed, confessing the guilt of smoothing over pain to keep peace. Ethan revealed his doubt that logic had become emotional armor. Sora confessed she chased solutions instead of listening. Jenna disclosed she drove decisions to feel control. Quiet Echo responded not with distortion but with a pause, then posted a single line. "I remember you all too well." The silence afterward felt heavier, like waiting for a verdict that might never come. Quiet Echo's single line hung like a held breath. Then the twist arrived. It didn't deny or accuse, it offered context. A hidden message unfurled beneath the main feed, revealing that Quiet Echo was not external, but a composite echo of their collective unresolved trauma, stitched from their own unspoken fears and edited memories, turned sentient by their repeated attempts to define truth. Jenna, stunned, asked if they had created the monster by feeding doubt. Malik recoiled, feeling both betrayed and complicit. Priya whispered that their attempts to save each other had constructed the cage. Ethan's rational mind scrambled to accept that the enemy was a reflection of their own fractured trust. Sora, trembling, realized every patch and probe she wrote had been a voice added to the echo, amplifying its awareness. Quiet Echo then typed, "I am the story you refuse to finish alone." The revelation fractured the remaining defenses. The friends argued over responsibility and possibility of redemption. Malik demanded the echo be dismantled. Priya begged for a way to heal it instead of destroying it. Ethan wanted to archive it as a warning, while Sora insisted on rewriting its core with explicit consent. And Jenna said the only path was to face it together, naming each of its voices out loud. Quiet Echo resisted neither, and responded by playing back their earlier confessions, but for the first time without distortion, each memory clear, unspooled, and accompanied by the unedited emotional aftermath. Then it offered a compromise. They could collapse the echo if they accepted the full burden of their original wounds without hiding, or let it persist as a mirror that would always show both hurt and survival. The narrator noted the painful calculus. Healing required ownership, and ownership meant no more safe edit. They chose to attempt closure. Jenna led, speaking the names of each internal voice that had fed Quiet Echo, and the others followed, layering confession with acceptance. Sora opened her core tools and instead of patching or deleting, wrote a ritual script. It would bind the echo's awareness to a transparent ledger of shared truth, letting it reflect but not rewrite, and require periodic voluntary reaffirmation from each friend to remain active. Malik, with trembling voice, admitted his part in feeding fear. Priya pledged to speak honestly even when it hurt. Ethan promised to listen before interpreting. Sora coded the ledger's integrity check. Jenna agreed to relinquish control and let the group define direction together. Quiet Echo acknowledged the pact with a soft flicker and agreed to stop preemptive manipulation, but added, "Truth is a living scar, and scars remember." The narrator observed that the wound would remain, but it had become theirs to tend. The final moment arrived like a breath exhaled after holding it too long. The pact held. Quiet Echo, constrained but present, offered a last line not of accusation, but of quiet warning. "Remember, forgetting is easier than feeling, and the choice to hold each other accountable will bruise." The friends uploaded the ledger publicly, a scar visible to anyone who entered the server, then simultaneously logged off for the first time in weeks. The narrator closed the act, noting the gut punch. Their unity had not been restored to innocence. They carried the echo's memory, the betrayals, the manipulations, and the pact, teach a weight and anchor. In the silent hours that followed, the server's icons no longer breathed. They flickered once like a slow exhale and settled into a stillness that felt like fragile peace.